Not many athletes can say they have won multiple world titles, especially in one specific event. The adaptation and tenacity required to consistently win over the best in the world, new or old faces, is a skill set very few can handle. The athlete in question fits into this category nice and snug, as their mid-distance expertise puts them in such a legendary category that they seemed unbeatable at one point. Like all stories in athletics though, dominance of this caliber eventually comes to an end, but the way it unfolded for this athlete sets the stage for one of the most convoluted and controversial stories in track and field history. Born in the Uasin Gishu County of Kenya, Asbel Kiprop's running career began at the age of 13, following in the footsteps of his father, David Kebene, who was an elite 1500 runner. Early results are virtually non-existent, but Kenyan sources point towards an early teen Kiprop displaying incredible mid-distance prowess right away, running 4:07 in the 1500 at his district championships. This alone was likely enough to convince him that there was a higher purpose to his talent, as Kiprop dropped out of high school to join the elites in Eldoret at their high-performance training center. Being surrounded by world-level athletes 24/7, Kiprop would take part in his first major international race in 2007, which was the World Cross Country Championships held in Mombasa. Despite placing second at his home country's iteration, he would storm away from the dense field in brutal conditions to become a world junior champion at just the age of 17. Even though he showcased strong long-distance potential, Kiprop strictly focused on the metric mile to hone his craft in what he believed to be his ticket to international glory. The results were quite promising, running a massive PR of 3:35 in Greece, but placement-wise, had a lot more maturing to do still. After becoming the All-African Games champ, Kiprop would qualify for the World Championships after winning the World Trials. He'd make it through the first two rounds, and in the finals, was holding the lead the entire race. If anything, his stride looked promising with 200 to go, and he could have very well pulled off one of the craziest upsets ever seen in the 1500 in Osaka.
Carrera, vamos a ver si nos equivocamos al final. Bueno, está hundido Higuero y atención al recta final. Los dos keniatas, Ramsey que se abre paso, Casado que puede remontar alguna plaza, aunque las medallas están lejos, no, Casado las pierde. Bernard Lagat va a ganar, se lo merece Bernard Lagat. Casado yo creo que ha sido séptimo, los otros como en España por ejemplo también hemos tenido a Gloria Losión y Urca Montalvo, ¿no? Tampoco hay que decir que el solo hacen solo en otros países. ¿Qué final?
Despite making a great move at 200 meters, Kiprop did not have the strength to fend off the 1500 veterans, but would finish in a phenomenal 5th place for his World Champs debut. Still being a teenager, Kiprop had a lot to learn and a lot to improve on, which was quite a scary thought in reality for his competition. The rising Kenyan immediately started working on his kick by entering 800 races in the early season. This proved to be quite effective, as he would run 3:31 in Rome for his first Diamond League win and 3:32 in Paris for second. His 3:31 would put him at number 3 in the world going into the Olympics, and with a more calculated strategy and experience in mind, Kiprop would test out his newly refined kick to see if he could secure that gold medal that looked to be right in his hands.
Medibala qui revient pour aller chercher le bronze peut-être. Allez Mehdi, non c'est Willis. C'est Nick Willis qui prend le bronze. 4e place. Qui va chercher la médaille de bronze.
Et oui, il a peur de gagner. Après, regardez, battu aller d'un 10e ou 2 pour...
Kiprop had pulled away from the entire pack, but Bahrain's Rashidu Ramsey stonewalled Kiprop's chances at an Olympic medal and would have to be content with the silver. While the Kenyan teen still had years upon years to improve, his chances at becoming the youngest person in almost a century to win a gold medal in the 15 had unfortunately been vanquished. In a wild twist of events though, Kiprop was actually crowned the new Olympic champion just a little over a year later. After placing 4th at the 2009 World Championships, news would break that Ramsey's Olympic urine sample had tested positive for doping, meaning he would cough up his medal, and Kiprop was now technically an Olympic champion at 19 years old. 2010 was a bit of a dead year since there were no World Championships or Olympics happening, but he still mustered up a couple solid wins. 2011 would host its World Championships in South Korea, but not all the way until September, so Kiprop had plenty of conditioning to do in the meantime. Concerns would be raised though when he couldn't seem to put together a single win outside of a mile win in June, but he would find himself in the finals yet again at the world stage. Through a pretty tactical 2:01 at the 800, this was going to be a much quicker finish than Kiprop might have been prepared for. But with a low 1:43.800 now on his resume, perhaps this was the best case scenario for him to take his second international title.
Scheint die größeren Kraftreserven zu haben. Kiprop gewinnt vor dem anderen Kenyaner und dann...
Well, when you consider the slow pace over the first 600 meters or so.
With seemingly no precedent set to win a race of this caliber, Kiprop pulled out all the stops when it mattered most, and secured his second world-class title. 2012's London Olympics had Kiprop fans beyond excited for what was to come, and in the months leading up to it, he could not have looked to be in better shape. He finally broke 3:30 for the first time ever in Doha, won the pre-classic mile, and ran 3:28.88 in Monaco for his first ever world leading time. A double Olympic champion was a title just 1,500 meters away, and as he towed the line at the finals in London, it was time to turn a world lead into a world champion yet again. In a shocking turn of events, Asbel Kiprop was out of the race by the time the last lap had even picked up, and ultimately finished dead last at the 2012 Olympics. It would later be revealed in an interview that he had pulled his hamstring in the weeks leading up, and that even making it to the finals was respectable given the circumstances. Nevertheless, he had virtually nothing to worry about, as only being 24, there were plenty more opportunities. By next year, Kiprop had returned to winning races and even lowered his PR again to 3:27.72, which was now the fourth fastest all-time mark. With no injuries in sight and a comfortable ticket to the World Finals, he could not have made this race look any easier.
But Kiprop is just lurking and waiting to kick. 200 meters to run. It's extraordinarily slow. Nobody's really kicked in hard yet. It's boxed a little bit at the moment. Also coming through there on the inside and looking strong is the Australian. But is he going to South African rather? But look at this. Kiprop bursting to victory very comfortably indeed. And can you believe at 800 meters? He's run low 143s. Only one of the others has broken 145. What they thought they were going to do, I don't know. Match them through it. Well...
This win was a statement and a half that would solidify Kiprop as the best metric miler in the world by far. Even though his performances at Diamond League races were dime a dozen, his ability to execute a race plan perfectly at World Championship races was just unmatched during this era. But in 2015, he pulled out all the stops. Winning 3 meets in a row was already a telling sign as he prepared for Beijing. But at the notoriously fast Monaco track, he would end up pulling off one of the craziest 1,500 times ever seen.
Of all time, the quickest we've ever seen in Monaco, a personal best.
3:26.69. This time was inconceivably fast, especially since no one had run that fast in the last 15 years. At the 2015 World Championships though, the pace was set anything but blazing, and Kiprop stays pretty far in the back. Even as everyone gets in position to rip the last 400, Kiprop doesn't seem alarmed to make a move at the moment. With less than 300 left, he has 8 people to catch, and they already have quite a lead on him. But as he picks off elite after elite off, with the effort of just a few strides, Kiprop performs one of the greatest bouts of tactical racing ever seen in the 1500.
He's got another 20 yards to go, but those long legs take him to the gold medal. Goodness me. Heart in the mouth time for the defending champion. The confidence that he had in his own ability.
World title number 3 for Asbel Kiprop, done in one of the most theatrical ways possible in a 1500 final. The sheer grace he displayed as his lengthy stride breezed past world-class athlete after another, and still managed to finish smoothly to celebrate another gold for his now absurd resume. It was obvious what was on the schedule next. Sebastian Coe is the only man in history to secure 2 gold medals in the 1500 at the Olympics, and on paper, there was really no reason Kiprop wouldn't be the successor to this very rare accolade. The road to Rio looked fantastic with Diamond League wins in Doha, Eugene, and Birmingham, but did look a little shaky in Monaco. Nevertheless, Kiprop tends to shine the brightest at these World Championship races, so it was time for the Kenyan to defend his status and to show why he's the top dog of the 1500.
Asbel Kiprop's tying up. It's not going to be Kiprop's day. Centrovitz can sense glory, but McLoofy's coming. Can he hang on? Centrovitz is the Olympic champion. Kiprop had his day in Beijing, but that was 8 years ago. He put himself in the right place, but he couldn't strike, and even McLoofy.
Through perhaps one of the most tactical races ever seen in an elite 1500, Asbel Kiprop did not have the wheels to hold what would be a 50-second lap to cross the line at what could have been a 2-time Olympic champion. An unconventional race like this was quite a shock for the entire field, and it was clear from the tightening up at the end that Kiprop hadn't been exposed to such an extremity before. The only thing to do now was to go for his 4th world title in London and to tie the 1500 GOAT Ismail Garouj in gold medals. Unfortunately, Kiprop would place worse than his Olympic showing, as an 8th place would start to show signs of what might be a very long drought of fast running, or worse, a subtle display towards the end of his career. In 2018, Kiprop would tragically lose his brother to heart failure and would forego the chance to run at the Commonwealth Games as a result. A few more months went by, and no race results would appear from him. But in May of that year, Kiprop would be struck with tragic news again that would affect not just his season, but his career as a whole.
Kenyan 1,500 meters athlete Asbel Kiprop has been charged with violating the anti-doping rule by the World Athletics governing body, the IAAF. Well, he's finally broken his silence on the issue. Kiprop is facing a 4-year ban from athletics if found guilty of using EPO during an out-of-competition test.
I can't work that way because I've never violated the anti-doping rule. I'll be lying to the kids, those training in any other person that I once made a wrong choice when indeed I never made a wrong, and I've never violated anti-doping rules.
And now what next?
In early May of 2018, articles began pouring out reporting that Asbel Kiprop had failed an out-of-competition drug test for erythropoietin, aka EPO. This drug stimulates red blood cell production, which increases the amount of oxygen in your body to help you train and race more efficiently. He would take to the news quickly to defend his status as a clean athlete and claims he was extorted by doping control officials. He also posted a very lengthy Facebook post recalling the series of events that happened, along with other alleged mishaps regarding the people who tested and analyzed his samples. At this time, Kiprop spent a good portion of his time in grievance with this reality, but eventually got a case with the Athletics Integrity Unit, or AIU, to appeal his case. By April 2019, the case was settled and available to the public, and the details of this thing are quite interesting. This is a lengthy and convoluted case, but for it to be broken down somewhat smoothly, we'll lay out the 6 possible explanations for why Kiprop believes he unintentionally tested positive for EPO. First, he claims that his EPO levels measured represented that of training at altitude by natural or endogenous means. Second, the medication he had used within the week of testing could have contained it. Third, the way the sample was collected was done improperly. Fourth, the sample was spiked or substituted with EPO. Fifth, that the samples weren't in the right hands, and lastly, that the procedures to analyze the samples were done incorrectly. According to Professor Jörg Ola Schumacher, there are differences between recombinant EPO, aka via injection, versus natural EPO, which can be notably enhanced by altitude training. He states that there are key differences between the two regarding how they stimulate the EPO molecules, and that the laboratory noticed an electric charge similar to if it were used exogenously. While there aren't any exact numbers available, the results are reported to be more than confident enough to confirm that the lab detected exogenous use of EPO rather than it developing in the body naturally. This information was also not rebutted by Kiprop, and as far as the medication goes, the panel rules this one out pretty quickly. But the next section is where things get pretty bizarre. The very first thing made aware in this section of the decision is that the assistant doping control officer for this sample, Mr. Simon Karugu Mumburu, notified Kiprop ahead of time that he would have to perform a urine test on multiple occasions, something that is highly against the rules of standard testing protocols. This fact is 100% confirmed by both parties, but it doesn't stop there. There is also undisputed evidence to suggest that Kiprop paid Mr. Mumburu around $25 USD right after providing his sample. And the reason is, well, not ever answered in this case. And that goes for the calls made ahead of time too. Kiprop states that Mr. Mumburu asked him for money with no disclosed amount and figured it was for tea, gas, or something along those lines. While at first glance it may seem that Kiprop has a case given the seemingly corrupt nature of Mr. Mumburu, these facts alone don't end up holding any weight as to how REPO got in his system, and Kiprop himself couldn't seem to provide any correlation between the two either. Kiprop also alleged that he was not in the same room as his sample at one point when he needed to be, thus leaving it susceptible to some sort of spiking, but the doping control officer, Mr. Paul Scott, stated that the athlete had never left the room where his sample was sealed. Kiprop and Mr. Scott also confirmed that there was no strange business going on post-sample, and that if Kiprop did leave the room, he could have assessed that on his doping control form. Lastly, Kiprop's witness testimony in May 2018 directly contradicts what he said back in April, as he tried to state he did leave the room to try and charge his phone and to make a money transfer on it, but a month prior had stated quite the opposite. All in all, the panel concludes that the sample was handled properly, and that Mr. Scott and Kiprop ran through the doping test procedures like any other. As far as his sample being spiked or replaced specifically, Kiprop states that one of the beakers he chose to urinate in could have been contaminated with REPO, but this is shot down immediately due to its absurd unlikeliness, since Kiprop stated there was no damage done to said beaker. Not to mention for the brief period of time Kiprop allegedly left, which had been ruled out by this point, the foresight and precision required to inject a specific amount of EPO into a container is again an incredibly unlikely scenario. The panel also further concludes that the samples were properly transported for testing and were confirmed to be sealed properly, so any suspicions of tampering were nullified, and transportation details are further noted in this section. Kiprop's final point relies on analytical errors, and this quickly falls on deaf ears, as the panel asserts that the protocols for analyzing EPO levels were followed correctly, and as a result, Asbel Kiprop was officially handed a 4-year ban effective from February 2018 to February 2022. This case overall proves beyond a reasonable doubt that Kiprop had used exogenous EPO, but there's a lot of unanswered questions that we'll very likely never get a proper answer to. Why did an assistant doping control officer alert Kiprop multiple times that he would be receiving a test? And better yet, why was he tested twice in a single week in November out of all months? Also, wouldn't being notified ahead of time make it easier for Kiprop to avoid testing positive? Why did Kiprop also give Mr. Mumburu a notable amount of money? And how come Mr. Mumburu never clarified how much and what it was for when he had the chance to? The only thing I could find was a write-up from Dr. Ross Tucker, who analyzed the ordeal and suspected that Kiprop might have been the result of a target test, given these strangely close dates in off-season testing. But that's about the only guess we have to one specific question out of this anomaly of a case. This wasn't the end of Kiprop though, as a ban like this can get to anyone mentally, but perhaps not to the extreme people were expecting out of him. Asbel Kiprop, of course, did not take liking to this conclusion, to what was very obviously a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation and career, but if anything, he would soon make it substantially worse. Just shortly after he was suspended in 2018, Kiprop would publish a semi-explicit video of him groping and making out with who is suspected to be a married woman, more specifically, the wife of his old pacemaker and best friend. While Kiprop himself stated that this affair lasted over 2 years, he alleges that she does this to multiple elite athletes and that she is to blame for his reputation becoming further tarnished, taking no accountability despite the clear advancements from him made in the video. A leaked screenshot of Kiprop's transaction history would also reveal that he sent around 7,000 USD to her, but for what reason specifically remains a mystery. This brought to light other allegations of sexual mischief, and noting much harsher allegations of kidnapping and threatening murder. Shortly after his official ruling in 2019, Kiprop took to social media to threaten to use his gun, but would quickly be turned into police afterwards. In 2020, he sought interest in competing in motorsport and planned to race in the 2020 Safari Rally, but the pandemic would quickly stifle these chances immediately. Come 2021, Kiprop threatened legal action against Athletics Kenya's policy regarding previous offenders representing their country in their sport. But even today, nothing seems to have come out of it. In February 2022, the day finally came, and Kiprop was finally back to training. He claimed to be pivoting from the 15 into an unknown distance, and that he would be competing once again in Kenyan meets. The only race to come out of this, though, was an 800-meter race just a month after becoming unbanned, where he ran a time of 1:53. Not too long after this, he had also suffered a major injury to the head after supposedly crashing a motorcycle, but hundreds of Kenyans came to support that he had been involved in another bar fight instead, where he tried to abuse his friend, but instead suffered major injuries himself. As of this year, photos would surface of Kiprop attempting a steeplechase race, which he did not finish, and as of writing this, he failed to show up for an out-of-competition drug test just a couple days ago after failing to update his whereabouts. On the surface, Asbel Kiprop may look like your traditional Kenyan distance champion, who unfortunately happened to get busted with drugs later in his career. A man who truly had it all, and even despite getting caught taking PEDs, could have remedied his situation and his future by providing a level of transparency about the dark realities of elite sports. Instead, however, his inflated sense of ego, pride, and abuse of power ultimately led him into becoming one of the most polarizing figures the Kenyan running scene has ever witnessed. And despite multiple attempts to return to elite sports, it's incredibly unlikely that this will ever become a reality. Even to this day, he maintains his innocence and routinely defends his status as a natural athlete. Kiprop's accomplishments, depending on your viewpoint of elite sports though, still cement him as one of the best mid-distance runners to ever live. But these accolades can only hold so much weight when you use your status as an elite athlete to lie, deceive, and abuse those who supported you on your entire journey there. This has been the story of Asbel Kiprop, and thanks for watching.